subaltern does speak. And I thought even in the first presentation of the essay, which I gave as a speech, that the subaltern was speaking. But what I minded was that the subaltern could not be heard. In other words, the speech act was not allowed to be completed. That, and the word allowed is important because there wasn't preparation on the part of the elite to be able to hear, not even listen, but hear. And so that position remains unchanged because there is constant subalternization, especially today in the situation of economic restructuring. The subalternization is almost automatic. Subaltern is not an identity, it's a position. Mm-hmm. And so the same people do not necessarily remain subalternized. And as for the impossibility of representation, that was not really ever my point. My point, because after all I believe in parliamentary democracy, which is a representational structure. My point was that when Deleuze and Foucault were talking about representation, they were not taking into account that for Marx, whom they were discussing a little in terms of the working class, for Marx, representation was not always used as a word. The two different kinds of words were used. One was vertreten, that is to say proxy, which is democratic structural representation. And the other was darstellen, which was portrait, which is really not democratic representation. And today, for example, the problem that I have is, since we have a very identitarian world where parliamentary voting blocks in the names of ethnic groups, women, and so on, they have taken away the thought of class. And so upwardly class mobile folks within a certain so-called identity group will present themselves without any kind of structure of choice or anything as speaking for the group. So people think that I had a problem with someone from another more dominant ethnic group represented. No, I had a problem, which I still have, which relates to people from a higher class representing themselves as the identity group as a monolith, whereas there is real class differentiation within it.
And the second question was, have cultural and post-colonial studies influenced changes in the situation of the subaltern, either from a symbolic or practical point of view?
Well, I don't know about, the different countries of the world, but my own sense is that, it's a question of class again. Since we are talking about cultural and post-colonial studies, we are talking about the university. And I believe today especially the connection between what used to be called the public intellectual, they don't really exist anymore. But today at least, the connection between the university and policy, which is really big in today's world, it has weakened to the point of non-existence. So, and cultural studies, I support cultural studies, okay, but as a person from within, very critical, because quite often what has happened is a good position which said, well, anthropology was a colonial discipline and it reported on oppressed and dominated cultures, and so now we speak about our cultures as people from within the culture. What we have to watch out for is the idea of a subject, an intending subject, presenting a culture and offering a correct view. This may be very, very useful in confrontational politics, and I'm all in favor. This may be very, very useful in the critique of the discipline as it used to be, and I'm very, very much in favor. But when it comes to the person being able to report his or her culture, I am deeply skeptical, because there is no autocritique, there is no possibility of this class mobile argument. There is no possibility of ideology critique. And so I feel, and also it's a pre-critical theory of the subject, that I can speak my culture. Culture alive is mistaken for human nature. That is the nature of culture. So therefore, this cultural explanation generally represents a certain kind of separation, which was clear in old-fashioned anthropology when it was actually doing ethnography, but not so much today. So cultural studies, I think, if there is an effect in the general situation, I think it has not always been for the good in terms of parliamentary democracy. And post-colonial studies, no, I don't think so, because the actual post-colonial nations are neo-patrimonial states. Patrimonial here in a state meaning different from the one you use when you use that word. Neo-patrimonial states, where the so-called structures of democracy are used to preserve a one-party state. So post-colonial nations are problems rather than solutions. So the idea of post-colonial being used by minorities or immigrant groups within metropolitan societies, that is a different situation. That the actual post-colonial nations in Africa and Asia are disappointing in terms of what is happening. And I speak as a person from one of them, yes.
The third question is, generally post-colonial first world thinkers, or the so-called northern studies, have usually ignored the South's reflective productions. Therefore, do they not reproduce the subalternity that they denounce?
In general, of course, I'm in agreement with this, but I, first of all, as I was explaining yesterday, don't think that the subaltern's reflective productions are available for the consideration of thinkers anywhere, including, and I'm myself a little skeptical of the distinction between North and South today, because that makes us ignore the North in the South, and I suppose also the South in the North. So therefore, I would rather not have this kind of division. In fact, the reflective productions of the South, when it's offered by folks from the global South as alternative epistemologies and so on, generally are not, they're representations rather than what's actually going on at the bottom. And that problem is not within whether we are reading, whether we are ignoring, etc. More than ignoring, I think what also happens is that so-called Southern reflective productions are complicit with the idea that whatever is happening in the North, although I don't really go with this kind of division, and complicit meaning folded together, as I said this morning, rather than conspiratorial, And what they're doing is they are reproducing this kind of, love us, we are Southern type thing, and it becomes a sort of foregone conclusion, the South is good, the North is bad type thing. I think we should confuse these distinctions and not take them as presuppositions as we enter the field of intellectual production. That's my feeling, and as a teacher myself, what I try to do is protect young thinkers from being swamped with dominant theorization too quickly, so that they can actually make their own mistakes and be ready at a certain point. But that's slightly different from your question.